The halls were dim. Silence wrapped the room like an old folded robe. President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone at a wooden desk. No guards, no aides, no briefings. Only one thing sat before him. A sealed letter. Elegant, cream paper. Handwritten Farsi. On the front, stamped in red wax, with a familiar insignia. He hadn't seen that seal in 10 years. Traoré's fingertips hovered over it. Hesitant. An aide had delivered it just minutes earlier, breathless and pale. "Mr. President, it's from Iran. No press release. No diplomatic cable. Just this. A letter, and the news whispered with it. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has passed." Traoré stared at the seal again, his heart beat slower. He hadn't spoken to Ali in years, not publicly. Their friendship had always been hidden beneath layers of silence and mutual understanding. Few even knew it existed, but it had existed. He broke the seal. The paper unfolded softly. Inside, Ali's handwriting flowed like ink from another time. "Ibrahim, my brother, if this letter has reached you, it means I am no longer in this world. And yet, there is something I must ask of you. Not as a president, not as a general, but as a student of faith and humility. Come to Iran. Come quietly. Come not for ceremony, but for closure. Something awaits you beneath the earth and within." The walls where men forget they were once boys. Traoré's fingers trembled. His breath caught. There was no signature. Only a line. What we shared was not for headlines, but for healing. Find me where the silence is deepest. A military plane stood ready. No flags. No entourage. Just President Traoré, dressed plainly. A worn jacket. A single black bag. The letter folded in his chest pocket. He turned to his chief of staff. "No press. No announcement. Tell them I'm visiting a quiet friend." The staff member hesitated. "But sir." "Iran." Traoré raised a hand, gently. "This is not about politics. This is about a promise. From one soul to another." He boarded. The engines roared like distant thunder. Night outside. Traoré sat with the letter open again, reading it over and over like a prayer. Suddenly, he reached into his bag and pulled out a photo, worn, tucked behind documents. In it, a much younger Ibrahim Traoré, standing in a dusty library. Next to him, Ali Khamenei, both smiling. No guards, no politics, just books behind them and a single phrase written in pen on the back. "One conversation can plant 1,000 trees." His eyes welled. He closed them. A young Traoré, nervous, visiting on a study tour. He hadn't expected to meet the man himself, but Ali had insisted. "You're not just a soldier. I see something in your eyes. A restlessness that only purpose can calm." They spoke for hours about justice, balance, Africa, history, silence, strength. At the end, Ali handed him a small Quran. "Not to convert you," he said softly, "but to remind you, no matter what faith, we all bow to something greater." Back to President Traoré opened his own palm. There it was. The same small Quran. He had carried it for years, not for prayer, but for memory. The plane touched down silently. No journalists. No red carpet. Just a quiet black car, and a man in robes waiting patiently beside it. Ayatollah Reza Mahdavi, Ali's oldest aide. He stepped forward, bowed slightly. "President Traoré, he asked us to receive you not as a guest, but as a brother." Traoré nodded. "Then take me not to the palace. Take me to where he became a man." Mahdavi smiled. "He knew you would ask that." They drove for hours out beyond Tehran, past military checkpoints, into the quiet hills of Kham. To a house. No palace. No marble. Just stone and silence, and a kettle whistling softly inside. Mahdavi opened the door. Traoré stepped in. It smelled of age. Paper, prayer rugs. And memory. On the wall a photo. Young Khamenei, barefoot, holding a child's hand. Standing under a fig tree, Mahdavi gestured to a cushion. This is where he studied. This is where he wept when he lost his father. And this, he pointed to a wooden chest, is what he left for you. The chest creaked open. Inside, a folded robe, a string of worn prayer beads, a map, hand-drawn, and a second letter. Thicker, more urgent. Tra or Eaq opened it slowly. Ali's handwriting again. Ibrahim, if you are reading this, you stood where I once stood. I leave to you what no throne or mosque can hold. My final thought. We were not meant to lead with volume, but with vision. The world forgets the power of quiet men. Remind them. A single tear fell down Traoré's cheek. Mahdavi watched quietly from the door. He believed you were his echo. His opposite, his completion. Traoré stood, holding the robe gently in his arms. Then let me carry his silence forward. Asterisk, as dawn light filtered through the small windows of the modest home in calm, President Traoré remained seated on the woven mat. The robe Ali Khamenei left behind rested across his lap. The prayer beads remained in his hand. Though he did not speak, Ayatollah Mahdavi returned with tea, placing it gently on the floor. Mahdavi, he often said, the robe of a teacher weighs more than the crown of a ruler. Traoré nodded. He understood the weight now. It was not of cloth, but of memory. Traoré, why did he write to me? Why now, when the world barely understood our connection? Mahdavi sat beside him. Mahdavi, because he knew legacy is not public. It is personal, and he knew only you would come. Not to honor a man, but to understand him. Mahdavi led Traoré to a small vehicle. They drove in silence for nearly an hour through winding roads into the desert hills. At last they arrived at an unmarked site. No tomb. No shrine, just a stone wall, surrounded by olive trees. Mahdavi, this is where you wish to be buried. Traoré stepped out. The ground had been recently turned. A small stone marked the grave. No name. Only a single inscription in Farsi. Here lies one who listened more than he spoke. Mahdavi stepped back, allowing the president to approach alone. Traoré stood silently before the grave. He placed the prayer beads on the stone and kneeled. Traoré, softly, you once said the most powerful words are whispered. I came to hear them again. He closed his eyes. Flashback, int, study room. IRIN years ago. Young Traoré and Khamenei sat side by side. No cameras. No translators. Khamenei, a nation can survive without gold, but not without faith in something bigger than itself. You, Ibrahim, carry that faith. Don't lose it in the noise. Back to President Traoré, opened his eyes, stood, and turned back to Mahdavi. Traoré, there's more he left me, isn't there? Mahdavi nodded. Asterisk, they entered an old religious seminary. Silent but full of students who paused to watch the foreign leader respectfully pass. At the end of a corridor, Mahdavi opened a thick wooden door. Inside was a private study, shelves lined with ancient texts. A small table. A chest identical to the one in the stone house. This one was unlocked. Inside, an old audio recorder, a sealed envelope, and a journal with Traoré's name written in Farsi. Mahdavi, he recorded this 2 years ago. He said it was for you alone. Traoré took the recorder and pressed play. Khamenei's voice emerged. Calm, clear, measured. Ibrahim, if you have entered this room, then I am no longer your peer, but your memory. This is not a confession, nor a lecture. It is my final dialogue with you. There was a pause. You once asked me what keeps a man from falling into pride when the world kneels before him. I told you then, the face of the one who first taught him silence. For me, that was my mother. For you, I believe, it was a teacher in a small village. We all rise from invisible hands. Traoré's expression changed. His throat tightened. The recording ended with a final sentence. My grave is not the End of my influence. It is merely the place where truth lies down and lets others speak. Speak now, Ibrahim. Traoré sat down with the journal. Inside were handwritten pages, stories, reflections, even a section about their past encounter, annotated with thoughts and observations about leadership in West Africa. One phrase was circled in red ink: "The leader who listens will inherit not thrones, but hearts." Tehran. Ibrahim Traoré and Madavi walked through a quiet street in Tehran. People began to recognize the president but made no noise, just nods. A few raised their hands in prayer. Respect without intrusion. Madavi, he told me once, if Ibrahim returns to this soil, the world might begin to understand that strength is not defined by distance, but by dignity. Traoré stopped walking. Traoré, I want to meet someone who knew him before the title, before the robes. Madavi nodded again. Madavi, then we must go to Mashhad, to where he was born. The train slid into Mashhad just after sunrise. President Ibrahim Traoré stepped out wearing a plain black coat. No flags, no press. Just him and Ayatollah Madavi, walking through the fog of early morning prayers. The streets bustled with movement, schoolchildren laughing, merchants sweeping storefronts. But no one noticed the president of Burkina Faso. And that was exactly how he wanted it. Traoré, quietly. The city is so alive. And yet, I've never felt closer to death. Madavi, that's because this is where he was born, and where he buried his past. They stopped before an old alleyway, worn bricks, green vines, laundry fluttering from rusted wires above. Madavi pointed toward a small door. Madavi, this is where it began. Intima, small courtyard home moments. Later an old woman opened the wooden door. Her eyes widened, not at Traoré's title, but at the presence of Madavi beside him. She nodded slowly. Old woman, you've come to see Javad. They followed her through a quiet courtyard filled with fig trees and bird cages. Inside, sitting by a fire with a wool blanket over his legs, was a man no younger than 90. His face carved by time. Madavi, President Traoré of Burkina Faso. This is Javad Farouzi. He was Ali Khamenei's oldest childhood friend. Javad looked up slowly. His eyes searched Ibrahim's face, as if trying to recognize someone he hadn't met. Javad, so you are the one he waited for. Traoré, waited for? Javad, he used to say, one day, a man will come from far away. Not for politics, but for the silence I left behind. Int courtyard. Louder Javad sipped sweet black tea as birds chirped from the cages behind him. Javad, we were just boys, before the titles, before the prayers. Ali was quieter than most, but not weak. He saw things, in people, in pain. He pointed to a small tree near the wall. Javad, one night we heard a woman crying there. Her husband had beaten her and locked her out. We were 11 years old. I was afraid, but Ali. He marched to the man's door and said, even God hears tears. And he heard hers, the man. Never raised a hand again. Traoré stared at the tree, still growing, still alive. Traoré, you knew the boy. The world only knew the robe. Javad, he never wanted fame, he wanted peace. But power is a cloak you can't always fold away. He reached for something beneath the table, a small wooden box. Hands trembling, he passed it to Traoré. A cute dot inside, a faded photograph. 2 boys. One smiling. The other, Ali, serious, with a slingshot tucked into his belt, on the back. To Javad, if we forget where we started, remind me. Javad looked up, tears in his clouded eyes. Javad, remind him I did, until the very end. XT. Mashhad Shrine SUNS. That evening, Traoré stood at the edge of the Imam Riza shrine. The golden domes reflected the fire of the setting sun. Around him, pilgrims whispered prayers. A little girl knelt beside her father, counting her blessings on red beads. Traoré turned to Madavi. Traoré, he taught millions, judged by thousands, but was loved by a handful. Madavi placed a hand over his heart. Madavi, and those are the ones who truly knew him. Int shrine chamber a lady entered, hidden chamber beneath the shrine. A room Khamenei had visited alone in the final years. Candles flickered. Incense curled toward the ceiling. On the wall, a single quote, hand-painted in Arabic and translated below. He who weeps not for himself cannot carry the pain of nations. Madavi handed Traoré a folded note. Madavi, he wrote this after your last visit. He asked that I give it to you only here. Traoré opened it slowly. Ali's voice, in ink. Ibrahim, if power ever robs you of your tears, come back here, kneel before the silence. And let it remind you, you are not a ruler. You are still that boy, barefoot, dreaming, as I was. Traoré folded the paper and pressed it to his chest. And for the first time in years, he wept. Not out of grief, but out of recognition. Of release. Ext. Mashhad streets. Night. Traoré walked alone now. No aides, no translator. He passed a bookstore, its window displaying dusty novels and yellowed poetry. And then he saw it, a poster, handmade, taped to the wall. A tribute. Ali Khamenei, 1939 to 2025. You taught us not how to lead, but how to listen. Int hotel room, late in IGHT. Back at his room, Traoré sat at the desk and wrote in his journal. He was not perfect. No man is. But what I saw was not a supreme leader. I saw a man who carried the invisible, the cries of widows, the doubts of faith, the rage of history, and still whispered, peace is possible. He closed the journal. And whispered into the dark, thank you, brother. The engines hummed gently as the presidential jet soared across the night sky. President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone, eyes fixed on a small wooden box on the tray in front of him, the one Javad gave him in Mashhad. Inside, the faded photo of two boys, a slingshot, a note in Arabic, and a sprig of dried olive leaves from the alleyway where Khamenei stood up for a stranger. Traoré acute held the photograph between his fingers like glass. Traoré, to himself, not just a man of power, a boy who once defied silence. He closed the box slowly and leaned back in his seat. The steward approached gently. Steward, would you like to eat, Mr. President? Traoré, quietly, no. I've already been fed, by memory. Ext. Ouagadougou, presidential grounds. Ing. The sun was just rising as the plane landed. Traoré stepped off slowly, without the usual fanfare or press. A few staff members waited, unsure whether to greet him formally. He just nodded, walking past them toward the gardens behind the palace. There, he sat under the baobab tree Mama Hawa once loved. He opened his notebook. And began to write. Int. Presidential press room. Later that day, journalists gathered. Whispers filled the room. Something was happening. The national flag and the Iranian flag stood side by side. Traoré entered. No teleprompter, no notes. Traoré, softly. This week, I lost a teacher. Not in Burkina Faso, not in Africa, but in Iran. The room stilled. He was not my president. He was not my blood. But he reminded me that strength comes not from command, but from care. He paused. Ali Khamenei taught me that real leadership is invisible until it is missed. A long silence. And so, we will build a place in his name. Gasps echoed through the room. Traoré, not a monument, not a statue. A school, for faith, for compassion, for silence that speaks. The Ali Khamenei Center for Ethical Leadership will be built here, in Ouagadougou. Ext. Village in Burkina Faso. Days. LADGR. The site was chosen quietly. An old school near where Traoré once played barefoot. Children stood watching as ground was broken by hand. not machine. And Traoré knelt in the dust, planting the first olive tree beside a wooden sign. On it, "He who listens leads. Ali Khamenei INT." Global newsrooms montage. Al Jazeera flashes headlines. Burkina Faso honors Iranian leader with school. BBC airs the emotional press speech. CNN panel debates the meaning of unity beyond politics. Social media floods with hashtags. Hashtag the last letter. Hashtag from MASHHAD to Africa. Hashtag TRIRE acute in Khamenei INT. Tehran's small mosque. An IGHT back in Iran. Ayatollah Mahdavi knelt in quiet prayer. Beside him sat Javad, holding the same photograph of two boys. On the mosque's wall, someone had pinned a printout. Burkina Faso builds Khamenei school. Mahdavi smiled gently. Mahdavi, he crossed oceans and reached hearts. Int Burkina Faso school construction site. 2 weeks later, the sun bore down on bricks being laid. Children ran around barefoot, giggling. A girl paused and looked at the photo pinned to a board, a black and white picture of Ali Khamenei, holding books as a child. Little girl, who is he? Traoré smiled, kneeling beside her. Traoré, someone who never stopped learning, even when he led millions. Girl, was he a king? Traoré, no, he was something better. Int Global Studio, Lev interview. Weeks later. Denzel, Washington sat beside President Traoré in a rare joint interview. The host leaned forward. Host, Mr. President, you've surprised the world. From Hollywood tributes to spiritual leaders in Iran. Why? Traoré didn't blink. Traoré, because one day my story will be forgotten. But if I can carry forward the echo of men and women who taught me to care, then I've done more than lead, I've remembered. Denzel nodded silently. He placed his hand on the president's. Denzel, some names are whispered in fame. Others are carved in quiet hearts. Ixt, Mashhad gravesite. Sunsed. A letter was placed on the simple stone. Dear Brother Ali, the school has begun. The olive tree grows, and a child in Africa now whispers your name. You once told me silence speaks. Today it roared. *6. Weeks had passed. The sun had not yet fully risen, but a crowd was already gathering outside the newly constructed Ali Khamenei Center for Ethical Leadership. No red carpet, no police barricades, just silence and morning mist. Children sat cross-legged on mats. Elders held candles. Parents whispered prayers in Massi and Fula. The Iranian flag stood quietly beside the Burkina one, and at the center of it all stood President Ibrahim Traoré, dressed in traditional Faso Danfani cloth, a hand-woven scarf around his shoulders. He turned toward the building, its clay-orange walls glimmering in dawn's golden light. A single olive tree swayed in the wind. Outside the entrance, Traoré softly, today we finish what a letter began. In school hall, late inside, rows of children sat before a simple wooden podium. Above them, a carved message in Arabic, French, and English. Lead not with power, but with presence. As the audience settled, Traoré stepped up to the microphone. Traoré, Ali Khamenei was many things. A scholar, a leader, a lightning rod of global debate. But today, I ask you to see something else. A boy who once gave his only coin to a crying woman. A boy who asked more questions than he answered. A man who believed leadership begins when the cameras leave. He paused, scanning the crowd. We don't gather today because we agreed with everything he said. We gather because even giants leave human echoes, and this school is one of them. Murmurs of emotion rippled through the room. Ext. Giant projector screen outside the school. Moments later, suddenly, a projector flickered to life. The crowd quieted. On the screen, a pre-recorded video never seen before. Ali Khamenei, dressed in white, sat before a stone wall. His voice was slow, low, and deeply personal. Khamenei, on video. To the children of a land I never saw, if this message finds you, it means I am gone. But if you are hearing it in a school bearing my name, then something has bloomed from silence. Gasps filled the crowd. Even Traoré froze. Khamenei, this world teaches us to raise fists before we open hands. But in my final years, I learned the opposite. You, children of Burkina Faso, are my hope, not to follow me, but to listen deeply and lead gently. The screen faded to black. Then silence. Then tears. Then applause. Not loud, not wild, but deep, steady, and filled with soul. Ext. Classroom courtyard. Later children gathered around wooden desks as teachers handed out new textbooks. Each book bore a golden olive branch and the message, "This space is sacred. Your thoughts are welcome here." Traoré walked past the classrooms. One child raised their hand. "Child, Mr. President, will you teach us too?" He knelt beside her. "Traoré, no, little sister, you will teach me." Small hall international delegation. That evening, a special session was held for visiting dignitaries from Iran, Mali, South Africa, and France. Everyone expected protocol. Speeches, strategy. But Traoré walked in holding something unexpected. Ali Khamenei's wooden box. He placed it at the center of the room. "Traoré, I brought this from Mashhad. Inside is a slingshot, a photograph, and a note from a boy. Before we debate trade, military, or aid, I ask you to remember what begins in a boy's hand may shape the world." The room went silent. Delegate from South Africa stood, visibly moved. "Delegate, what is Burkina Faso teaching us?" "That humanity is a better currency than pride." Applause broke out. Ext. School rooftop. Sunset. Traoré stood with a small group of students, watching the sun dip below the horizon. He handed one of them a small notebook. "Traoré, this was my journal during my trip to Iran. I want you to add your thoughts, your dreams. And when it's full, pass it to another." "Child, what do we write, Mr. President?" "Traoré, write what silence has taught you." Radio station, late night. Broadcast. That night, Burkina Faso's most beloved radio host aired a nationwide tribute. Radio host, voiceover. "Tonight, we honor the school built on silence. The leader remembered not in power, but in principle. And the children who now carry his name, not like a burden, but like a whispered prayer." Ouagadougou. Presidential Palace, midnight. Traoré sat alone, holding Khamenei's final note one more time. He whispered toward the window. "Traoré, Ali, we built the school. Now let the silence teach." He folded the letter, placed it into a small frame, and set it beside a candle on his desk. The flame flickered softly. The rainy season had passed. What once was fresh paint and hope was now full of life. Classrooms buzzed with questions. Chalk. Dust floated like tiny prayers. And outside, the olive tree bloomed for the first time. Children gathered every morning beneath it, reciting words in 3 languages. We are leaders when we listen. We are brave when we forgive. We are strongest when we serve. The school's message was spreading far beyond its dusty walls. Classroom. A girl named Saliha, just 11 years old, stood before her classmates. She spoke softly, nervously at first, then with surprising strength. "Saliha, my father never believed girls should speak. But Mama Hawa did. And now President Traoré and Mr. Khamenei believe in me too." The classroom clapped. Her teacher wiped a tear. That night, her speech went viral. #Salaha Speaks began trending across West Africa. Iranian living room. Semenij, Ehdn, a modest home in Isfahan. A grandmother sat with her grandson watching the video of Saliha. The boy turned and asked, "Boy, grandmother, who was this Khamenei?" She smiled. "Gently, grandmother. He was someone who believed in many things, but I think In the end, he believed most in children. Int Global Conference United Nations, a week later motion was introduced to recognize the Ali Khamenei Center for Ethical Leadership as a global pilot for cross-cultural education. Ambassadors whispered. Skeptical. Then, a surprise message was played, a simple pre-recorded clip of President Ibrahim Traoré speaking from the school's Olive Garden. Traoré, we named a school after a man many feared, but here he is remembered not for politics, but for planting silence into listening and listening into light. If we can do that, so can the world. The room went silent. Then. Applause. Then. A unanimous vote. Ext. Burkina Faso largest public gathering in years. Night. A candlelight vigil spanned across miles. Thousands of people stood holding hands, their faces glowing in the dark. Among them, families, students, elders, children. At the center, a giant screen. It lit up. Traoré appeared. He wasn't in his palace, not on a podium. Just sitting under the olive tree. He spoke calmly. Traoré, a man once wrote me a letter. He spoke of faith, of humility, of unseen seeds. That letter led me to Iran. And from Iran to the truth. He held up a small framed note, Khamenei's letter. Ali Khamenei is gone. But he left. Behind more than words. He left us a mirror. Not to show us who he was, but who we might still become. He looked directly into the camera. If a boy from Iran and a boy from Burkina Faso can write each other's future across time and death, what's stopping us? The crowd began to hum, quietly, deeply. A song of unity began to swell, not rehearsed, not written. Just felt. Int. Radio station. Later that night, the same beloved radio host closed his program. Host voiceover. We once feared silence. Now we honor it, in a girl's voice, in a president's tears, in a letter never meant to be opened, and in the wind, brushing softly through an olive tree. Ixt. Ali Khamenei Center. The next morning. One final shot. A wide aerial view. Children walking barefoot to school. Teachers waiting at the doors. And the bronze plaque freshly mounted on the front wall, dedicated to the boy who believed his whisper could change the world. Ali Hosseini Khamenei, born 1939, remembered forever below. It, etched in gold, by the people of Burkina Faso. Int. Final scene. Presidential balcony. President Ibrahim Traoré stood watching the horizon. No phone in hand. No guards near. Just him and a folded scarf. Mama Hawaz, resting over his shoulder. He whispered, Ali, they hear you now. Soft wind blew through the balcony, catching the edge of the scarf. And somewhere across the world, a young child picked up a pen to write their first letter. To someone they've never met. Because now, they believe in the power of a whisper.